At first glance, it looks like triumph. Skylines stretch farther than the eye can see, towers of glass, marble, and steel glinting in the sun. Boulevards so wide you could land a plane. Subway lines ready, streetlights glowing, fountains running. Everything except people. Step closer and the silence feels wrong. You hear only the hum of streetlights, the echo of your footsteps, the whisper of dust swirling across a 6-lane road with no traffic. No voices, no laughter, no life. Welcome to China's ghost cities, vast metropolises built not for citizens, but for statistics. They stand as monuments to an age that worshipped growth above all else, to a dream that believed concrete could buy confidence. These cities were never meant to fail. They were meant to prove that China's rise was unstoppable, that every plot of land could become prosperity, every tower another line of GDP. But when the cranes fell silent, another truth emerged. You can build a city in a year, but trust takes a generation. And once trust cracks, glass isn't the only thing that shatters. The story begins with victory. After a century of invasion, famine, and revolution, China entered the new millennium determined never to be poor again. Factories multiplied, exports exploded, millions escaped poverty. It was the fastest economic expansion the world had ever seen. And it ran on one fuel: construction. When Beijing measured success, it didn't count happiness, it counted buildings. Local officials were promoted not for stability, but for speed. The higher the skyline, the higher your career. So provinces competed like athletes on steroids, outbuilding, outspending, outborrowing. But there was a catch. Local governments couldn't freely tax citizens. So they found another source: land. They sold land use rights to developers. Developers used those rights as collateral to borrow from banks. Banks created loans that funded more construction, which raised land prices, which created more collateral. A perfect circle, a machine that could not stop. Families joined in. For them, property wasn't just shelter. It was security, status, and the only reliable investment in a country with few safe options. Parents bought apartments for children not yet born. Developers sold homes not yet built. Speculators flipped contracts before a single brick was laid. By the 2010s, China was pouring more cement every 3 years than the United States had in the entire 20th century. Ghost cities were born not from failure, but from momentum. The system rewarded anyone who built and punished anyone who paused. In the official reports, growth looked infinite. In reality, China was constructing an empire of unlived dreams. Every empire believes its boom is built on genius. But China's boom was built on something older, more fragile, and far more human: debt and belief. Developers borrowed billions to fund endless expansion. Banks lent freely, knowing the state would never let the system fail. Families poured savings into unfinished apartments, convinced property prices could never fall. It was faith disguised as finance. And faith, once broken, is the hardest currency to restore. At first, it looked unstoppable. The more people borrowed, the more prices climbed. The more prices climbed, the more everyone borrowed. A self-fulfilling miracle. By 2020, real estate and its ripple effects made up nearly a third of China's entire GDP. Construction wasn't just an industry anymore, it was the bloodstream of the nation. Every local government relied on land sales to fund hospitals, schools, and infrastructure. Every bank relied on property loans to stay solvent. Every citizen believed their apartment was the safest bet in the world. It was an ecosystem of optimism until optimism met arithmetic. Because debt, unlike dreams, compounds. And when growth slows, compounding becomes a curse. To cool speculation, regulators drew the 3 red lines. Limits on borrowing meant to rein in excess. But those lines did what no foreign rival could. They stopped the machine. Developers suddenly found themselves out of cash. Projects froze midair. Buyers who had paid in full stared at half-built towers and demanded refunds that would never come. The system, once spinning like a turbine, began to groan under its own weight. At the center stood Evergrande, once China's second largest developer. Now a cautionary tale. $300 billion in liabilities. A company so large that its failure sent tremors through the entire financial system. Investors panicked. Ordinary citizens, watching construction halt, joined mortgage boycotts, refusing to pay for homes that no longer existed. Across provinces, protests spread. The dream of security had turned into a nightmare of silence. Debt had once been destiny. Now it was a sentence. Collapse never begins loudly. It begins with a pause. And in China, the pause came when the crane stopped moving. The ripple effects were instant. Local governments, deprived of land sale revenue, ran short of funds. Public services slowed. Some cities struggled to pay teachers and healthcare workers. To fill the gap, officials issued new local government financing vehicles, shadow bonds that borrowed against a future already spent. The illusion continued, but the confidence was gone. The housing market froze. Apartments that once sold in hours now sat empty for years. Real estate agents disappeared from their offices. Developers vanished, leaving behind mountains of unfinished concrete and unpaid workers. For ordinary families, it was betrayal. An apartment had been more than a roof. It was a legacy, a dowry, a symbol of stability. Now it was a liability that could not be sold, lived in, or trusted. The human toll was quiet but deep. Marriages delayed, children's futures postponed. Middle-class dreams, carefully built over 2 generations, evaporated almost overnight. Beijing responded with the same precision that had once powered its rise. It cut interest rates, pressured banks to lend again, even encouraged state-owned developers to rescue private ones. But something more vital had been lost: belief. The Chinese people had always believed in work, in sacrifice, in progress. Now, a new phrase began circulating online: Tang Ping, lying flat, a silent rebellion, a generation choosing to opt out rather than burn out. They stopped buying homes, stopped chasing promotions, stopped believing that success could still be built on loyalty and effort. If the system no longer kept its promises, why should they? The ghost cities were no longer empty buildings. They were symbols, monuments to a dream too large to sustain, a warning written in glass and steel. Because once a society builds more wealth than it can trust, collapse isn't a question of if, but when. What does it feel like to live inside a dream that never woke up? Imagine a city built for 1 million people, and you are one of a few hundred who moved in. Streetlights blink on at dusk, illuminating 10,000 identical balconies, but no voices echo between them. The shopping mall is pristine, every storefront gleaming, but every shutter closed. You walk through an empty park, the grass trimmed, the air still, and for a moment you wonder if you are the ghost. This is life in China's unfinished promise, a world where progress was measured in concrete, not connection, where cities were built faster than citizens could fill them, and where silence became the soundtrack of ambition. The emptiness isn't just physical, it's emotional. Families who poured decades of savings into apartments they can't occupy visit once a year, just to take photos and remind themselves it's real. Workers who helped build those towers often never got paid, while developers vanished into bankruptcy courts. For many, the dream of property, the ultimate symbol of security, has become the greatest source of insecurity. And yet, even here, the illusion persists. At night, local officials sometimes order entire districts lit up for inspection, every window glowing as if alive. From a helicopter, it looks perfect, prosperity shining across the plains. But from the ground, it's only neon reflected on empty glass. Ghost cities aren't abandoned ruins. They're living metaphors. A country trying to keep the lights on even when no one's home. Every crash tells you who really mattered. When the dust settled, some players didn't fall, they consolidated. State-owned developers absorbed the carcasses of private firms like Evergrande, turning a crisis into a quiet power grab. The more others failed, the more control they gained. In the short run, it looked like stability. In the long run, it looked like nationalization by default. For local governments, the consequences were brutal. Debt from years of reckless building came due. Many could no longer fund social programs or pay staff. To survive, they borrowed more. A debt pyramid stacked on sand. And ordinary citizens, they became the shock absorbers of the entire system. Savers watched the value of their homes stagnate or fall. Young couples stopped buying altogether, shattering the cycle that once kept demand alive. Elderly parents who had invested every yuan into real estate for their children's futures now faced the unthinkable. Their life savings tied to buildings no one wanted. For decades, China's middle class had been told that property was sacred. Buy a home, they were told, and you'll be safe. Now, they see the truth. Safety was the illusion that kept the system running. The collapse redrew China's social map. Developers who gambled and lost were shielded by political ties. Banks that funded the bubble were quietly bailed out. Meanwhile, small investors, homebuyers, and workers carried the weight. But the damage wasn't just economic, it was psychological. A generation raised to believe that hard work and faith in the system would pay off now faces a deeper question. If growth was an illusion, what was it all for? It's the same question every empire eventually faces, from Babylon to Rome, from Tokyo to Berlin. when the story that built your nation stops working? What replaces it? It's tempting to think China's ghost cities are a uniquely Chinese problem. They're not. They're a mirror in, and the reflection isn't flattering, because beneath the glass towers and silent streets lies a question every modern economy should fear. What happens when growth becomes theater? When countries build not for need, but for numbers? When GDP becomes a god that must always be appeased? China simply performed this ritual on the largest stage in history, but the script isn't new. Look west and you'll see its echoes. Empty condos in Canada that exist only as investment shells, skyscrapers in Dubai standing half rented under desert heat, shopping malls in the US turned into hollow monuments of consumption past. Governments everywhere measure progress by cranes on the skyline, forgetting that not all that grows is alive. The illusion works until it doesn't, and when it fails quietly at first. Not with riots or revolutions, but with shrinking confidence, delayed marriages, falling birth rates, and a generation quietly stepping out of the game. That's how civilizations lose momentum, not through destruction, but through exhaustion. In China, that exhaustion now has a face. It's the college graduate moving back to a ghost town apartment bought by his parents. It's a young woman refusing to marry because she refuses to inherit a mortgage. It's the older couple staring out their high-rise balcony, realizing the city around them was never built for them at all. It was built for an idea. For most of history, collapse was local. A nation's mistakes stayed within its borders. Not anymore. China's slowdown now ripples through the world. Its construction boom once fed Australia's iron mines, Brazil's soy fields, Africa's copper belts. Now, ships sail half empty, prices drop, and nations that built their fortunes on China's hunger face hunger of their own. And the West, smug in its distance, should be careful, because while China's ghost cities rot under smog, the West has built ghost balances, soaring debt, inflated assets, and a belief that money can always buy time. When interest rates stay low for too long, when central banks conjure trillions to prevent discomfort, when governments build policies on the assumption that the system can never stop, they are laying the same foundation China once did, just invisible instead of concrete. The form changes, the math does not. China built towers no one could live in. The West builds promises no one can pay for. Both are ghosts of confidence. Different languages, same delusion, because the end of every boom looks the same. The lights stay on, even when no one's home. The numbers rise even as trust falls. And then, one day, the silence becomes too loud to ignore. The ghost cities of China are not just abandoned places, they're messages, written in steel and stone for anyone still willing to read. They whisper that money without truth breeds emptiness, that progress without purpose creates decay, and that a civilization can build faster than it believes. Rome's coins, Weimar's marks, Japan's towers, China's cities, different eras, same gravity. When value becomes illusion, collapse follows conviction. The lights are still on, the cranes still move, but the question now is not whether China will finish its cities, it's whether the world will finish learning from them, because somewhere, beyond those empty streets and silent malls, another empire is already drawing blueprints. Different language, same dream, same trap.